course, as the Torah fall down, something has to be done.
Likkutei, Drushim Succos, page Pei. Okay, we started the Mayim B'Shavta Mayim B'Sasein. Okay. We're at Beit. Okay, now Rebbe is explaining that there's a concept called Nisach HaMayim, pouring water on the Mizbeach and Succos. It's not mentioned in Torah, it's only Halacha Moshe Sinai. So he says, why is it only Halacha Moshe Sinai? Why isn't it explicitly mentioned in Chumash? So he starts explaining there's a Nisach HaYayin and Nisach HaMayim. And he explains, Yayin is a level of Simcha, but that's the level of Bina. And he says that's the union of and he says the difference is Nisach HaYayin a whole year. Even to Nisach HaYayin is Succos, because Succos is Man Simchaseinu. So he says sometimes a person could be happy, but it's a concealed level of happiness. Nisach HaYayin and Succos is a level of Simcha that comes out Beis Galus, revealed. But water, on the other hand, is the level of Kohanim, because water comes from a high place to a low place, is more the level of Kabbalah Sir. Okay, we're up to Beit on page Pei. It's known in Torah the difference between the oral Torah and the written Torah. Torah is primarily the level of Asis V'tzirufim. It's the concept of letters. Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, there's exact amount of letters. It's exactly what it is. The whole Torah, meaning Torah Shebiksav, is the names of Hashem. Therefore, in Torah Shebiksav, like we know, a Sefer Torah, one letter missing, the whole Torah is no good. Every letter has to be properly written. And if two letters touch, the whole Torah is not kosher, right? In other words, it's like the Rebbe explains in Sichos, we find two opposite things about the written Torah. Number one, if one letter is missing, the whole thing is no good. And if two letters are touching, it's no good. So l'cher is contradictory. If one letter is missing, means every letter is connected to the next. You need every single letter. So why if they're touching, it's not kosher? On the contrary, touching should be better, because they're more connected. So the Rebbe explains, because Yiddishkeit, every person does their own thing. Every person has their own space. You know, there has to be space around the letter. And yet, every single Jew is important. And if God forbid one Jew is missing, Hashem wouldn't have given the Torah and things like that. So he says, Bina. Letters are the level of Bina. It says in Kabbalah, we see clearly. When something intellectual becomes understood, it's a very interesting thing. Every person, when you think in your language. You think in letters. Sometimes there's two types of thinking. You must think with letters. You can't think without words. Sometimes when you, let's say, have to speak, so you think what you're going to be speaking, that's when the letters in your brain, in your thought, become actually very tangible. Except they're not spoken letters, they're thought letters. But even when you just think, you're walking in the street and you're thinking, I mean, if you do, most people don't think, period. So then, the letters, there are letters there. So what are letters? Letters is actually a revelation. Intellect becomes revealed in letters. Emotions become, if you love somebody, or fear somebody, hate somebody, whatever the emotion is, you love them, when you think about them, it's all in letters. Anytime you think, it's in letters. Therefore, Torah Shebiksav is called a Bina, because Bina is understanding. Understanding must come through letters. You can't understand without letters. But Chachma And therefore it says in Kabbalah and Chassidus like this. Chachma and Bina, Chachma is the initial spark that you get a brainstorm. There's no letters there yet. When you start thinking about it, then you get letters. There are letters of thought. You think in letters. There are letters of speech. So he says that's why Torah Sheba'al Peh, oral Torah, which every letter is doesn't really matter. It's the idea, the understanding which really matters. A letter more, a letter less. If a Gemara is missing a letter, it doesn't make the Gemara invalid. Because in Torah Sheba'al Peh, oral Torah is basically primarily understanding. So that's the level of Chachma versus Torah Shebiksav, oral, the written Torah, which is Bina, because it comes into letters. V'zau inyan ha'isas Torah Shebiksav is the level of Bina, and Bina is Nikra Sefer Torah in the Zohar. V'hain b'chinas eis yisam machshava, the letters of thought. Meaning like this. Torah Shebiksav is primarily letters. You don't have to understand Torah Shebiksav. If somebody reads Tehillim and they don't know what they're talking about, they still get the mitzvah of learning Torah. They don't get the mitzvah of understanding Torah. There's two mitzvahs, by the way. When it comes to learning Torah, there's two mitzvahs. Learning Torah and understanding Torah. Torah Shebiksav, written Torah, 24 books of Tanakh. If somebody reads it and doesn't understand it, they still get a mitzvah of learning Torah. Therefore, you can call up to the Torah somebody who doesn't know what the words mean. And he gets an aliyah and he makes a bracha over it. How can he make a bracha if he doesn't know what he's reading, what the guy's reading? He doesn't know. Because Torah Shebiksav, the main thing is the letters, not understanding. In Torah Sheba'al Peh, if you don't understand it, you're not getting the mitzvah of learning Torah either.
Execution, the mitzvahs and other.
Yeah, I'm talking about learning now. I'm not talking about doing mitzvahs. Yeah. Doing a mitzvah, even though you don't know what you're doing, you just do it. You get a mitzvah.
We do and we believe it.
Yeah. Afagav the Reis min Chochma Nafsel Gabi Amatz is the level of Chochma. But the Gabi Anivroim is the level of Bina. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe explains in parentheses, that's why, in order to get Torah Shebiksav on Mahar Sinai, they needed 50 days of preparation. That's the 50 levels of Bina. Because Torah Shebiksav is Bina. But Torah Sheba'al Peh is a level of Chochma, V'sham Einais Yis'iker. In other words, it's very interesting. Normally, people learn, if somebody asks you, what's greater, Torah Shebiksav or Torah Sheba'al Peh? Written or oral? Now, of course, written Torah is holier than oral Torah. But in this respect, oral Torah is a higher level of Chochma versus the written Torah, which is the level of Bina. What is important in the oral Torah is understanding. Therefore, you don't care so much about the letters. The main thing is understanding it. Okay? Because in the oral Torah, the primary level is to understand it. The Gemara says, my time of Rab Meir. What's the reason of Rab Meir? Meaning, in Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Gemara wants to understand the reason for everything. Torah Shebiksav, you don't have to understand. So the Alter Rebbe is leading up to a very interesting point. He said, what's the difference between pouring wine versus pouring water on the Mizbeach? So the Rebbe is explaining, wine is Bina, understanding. It makes you happy. You understand it. And Chochma is a level of Mayim, which is Bittul. Bittul, humility. No understanding. That's why Nisach Hayayin is the level of Bina. The level of understanding. Torah Sheba'al Peh. Nisach Hamayim, pouring water on the Mizbeach, is the level of Torah Shebiksav. Torah Shebiksav, which is the level of Chochmah. No, I'm sorry, here it says differently. But whatever. Pouring wine is the level of Chochmah, which is Torah Sheba'al Peh, believe it or not. And Bina is the level of Torah Sheba'al Peh. He says, V'ubchin Chochmah K'neida. Okay, skip the band, it's 4 lines. Ubezeh yuven inyan anal, shev nisach hayayin ksiv b'Torah. Nisach hayayin, which is the level of Bina, which is Torah Shebiksav. Torah Shebiksav. That's why the pouring of the wine is mentioned clearly in Chumash. Because wine is Bina, Torah Shebiksav is Bina, letters. But because Yayin is the level of Bina, Torah Shebiksav. Therefore, the mitzvah of pouring wine on the Mizbeach, which is the level of Torah Shebiksav, could be mentioned in Torah Shebiksav because it's the same level. Which is the level of Chochmah, which is the level of Mechan Da'aba. Okay? Bottom line of what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is, the Alter Rebbe asked the question at the beginning of the Maimer, why is pouring wine mentioned in Torah and pouring water isn't? So Alter Rebbe explains that wine and Torah Shebiksav are the same thing. They're both Bina. Water and Torah Sheba'al Peh is the same thing, both the level of Chochmah. So therefore, wine, which is the level of Torah Shebiksav, could be mentioned in Chumash. Wine, which is the Torah Shebiksav, could be mentioned in Chumash. Water, which is not wine, not Torah Shebiksav, but Torah Sheba'al Peh, cannot be mentioned. It has to be oral Torah.
Less quantity, of wine.
Yes. In other words, Torah Shebiksav is limited. There's exact Torah Shebiksav. You have exact amount of letters. You know today exactly how many letters there are in the whole 24 books of Torah. How many letters of Torah Sheba'al Peh? There are no letters because letters don't matter. You can, in any language, in any amount, So therefore, it's actually not the level of letters. It's the level of what's called Chochmah. So Torah Sheba'al Peh, in this respect, is higher than Torah Sheba'al Peh is higher than Torah Shebiksav.
It seems backwards.
What?
It seems backwards.
It seems backwards, but it's not.
No, it's not.
Because seemingly, Torah Sheba'al Peh explains Torah Shebiksav.
Right. And also it's more detailed.
More detailed. But the bottom line is, in Torah Shebiksav, letters matter, and letters are Bina. And Torah Sheba'al Peh is more the understanding, not necessarily in letters.
So if it's understanding, it should be wine.
I understand, but that's what he's saying here, not like that. What? You have to skip those long parentheses, middle, a little past midway, down the page. It says in the pasuk that your friends are better than Yayin. The Gemara says, the words of the Chachamim are sweeter to me than the wine of Torah. It says like this. The Medrash says in the pasuk, Tevim deidecha, your friends are better to me than wine. Dodecha means your friend, and Likkutei, right? Is better than wine. So the Gemara says that the words of the Chachamim, i.e. Torah Sheba'al Peh, is more precious to me than Torah Shebiksav. So he said, okay? What does this mean? So he says, in the Sefer, the kids say in the Bar Mitzvah Maimed. It says in Sefer Yetzirah, Hashem created the world with three things. Sefer, V'sipur. Writer, book, story. Sefer is the level of Chachma. This is what the kids say in the Bar Mitzvah. Probably don't know what they're talking about. But he said, Sefer, the level of Chachma, Mashpil is Sefer, which is Bina, the level of Machshava. V'sipur, who bechinas Diba, Mekabel, was Sefer, which is the level of Bina, Shari Bilti Machshava, Yevshel Adaber. In other words, it says like this. There's the three things that Hashem created his world with was Sefer, the scriber, the one that's the writer, and then you have the book, and then you have the telling. You can't have the book without the writer. So the writer is writing the book. And then once you have the book, then you could tell the book. You could teach the book. So there's three levels that Hashem created the world with. The writer, the book, and the telling of the book. And he says, skipped a few lines. That's why it says the words of the Chachamim are more precious to me. Now, Seifrim is a funny word to write for the Chachamim of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Hashem should say the words of Torah Sheba'al Peh are more precious than Torah Sheba'al. He calls them Sefer. Why? Because Sefer is the level of Chachma. V'shamu shoter Sheba'al Peh. V'nisach hamayim, and the pouring of the water, which is higher than Yener Shotera, which is Torah Shebiksav, that's called Sefer, which is the level of Bina. Okay? V'nisach hayayim, shebechinas Chachma is the level of Sefer, Gever ma'ed na'al, v'chinas Bina, which is Sefer. There's Torah Shebiksav, there's Torah Sheba'al Peh, and there's a level higher than both of them. Whatever. And he says, even though we know Chachma is higher than Bina, so l'chera, Torah Sheba'al Peh is greater than Torah Shebiksav, and pouring water is greater than pouring wine. After became Chachma Bina. And the lame is Pashi. Meaning like this, the Zohar says the expression, Chachma and Bina are two inseparable friends. Trei Reyin, two friends, the lame is Parshim, that never separate themselves. Which means, Im kein tzarech lechabram tamid lamata, you need to combine them, we need to combine Torah Shebiksav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, Chachma and Bina. I mentioned many times when the Alter Rebbe, one of the greatest Talmidim of the Alter Rebbe was called Reb Aaron Strasheller. He was the, like so to speak, the greatest student of the Alter Rebbe. And he was very, very friendly with the Mittler Rebbe. And one time, the Mittler, and they used to talk a lot in Chassidus and everything. Mittler Rebbe was much younger than him. So, one time they were walking together, so one chassid said to the Alter Rebbe, Tzrei Lein the Leim is Parshin, two inseparable friends. So the Alter Rebbe said, Halavai, it should only be like that, because later, for whatever reason, the Rebbe Steller turned himself away from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, and it was a separate, they were not friends anymore, so to speak. But all of his teachings are based on the Alter Rebbe's teachings. Steller.
Well, he became another...
He became his own Rebbe, yeah, but it didn't last long.
And the wine makes you drunk.
Right.
The wine opens you up.
You can get drunk on water too, by the way.
No, you won't.
Yeah, it takes a lot. Obviously not like, nothing. You can get drunk on anything. That's what doctors tell me, I don't know. Get drunk on anything, it just takes a lot more. But this is the difference between Torah Shebiksav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, but one's Chachma, one's Bina, but you got to combine them. They have to become one. You can't have Torah Sheba'al Peh without Torah Sheb'Ksav, and you can't have Torah Sheb'Ksav without Torah Sheb'Ksav. All the Tzedukim, the Beitusim that didn't believe the Koraites, that didn't believe in the oral Torah, so you can't have the written Torah without the oral Torah, because then you misconstrue, you mess up. They used to wear tefillin here. Beinei Nechem. They didn't, tzitzis, doesn't say in the Torah wear tzitzis. It says you should look at it, or the Isa Mesa. He used to hang up tzitzis and look at it. He didn't wear it. So even, for the whole Shabbos he sat in the dark, because the Torah says you can't have any fire. So you mess the whole thing up, the whole thing becomes messed up. And yet at the same time, you can't have Torah Sheba'al Peh without Torah Sheb'Ksav, because then you can misinterpret Torah Sheba'al Peh. So you need both together. Both have to be combined and united. And he says, "V'zeu shafta mayim b'sasim mimay mayim" is the level of chachma, and sasim, which is joy, is the level of bina. U'v'zeh yischaber b'chinas chachma bina to be treirei and loy mispashim. So in other words, you need to connect chachma and bina, Torah Sheb'Ksav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. Therefore, the question is, there was the greatest simcha was pouring the water. Yeah? Water is not simcha. He said, bina, wine is simcha. Water is the opposite, Kabbalah says, not simcha. He says, but because they need to be combined together, you need to have simcha, wine and water together. So therefore, shafta mayim b'sasayin mi mayne ha-Yeshua. B'sasayin, they had to do it with simcha. And therefore the Gemara says, the greatest simcha was Simcha's Beit HaShoeivah, when they poured water. That contradicts the whole concept. Wine is simcha, not water. But the answer is because the Torah says you need to combine both of them together. There has to be wine and water mixed, chachma and bina mixed, Torah Sheb'Ksav and Torah Sheba'al Peh mixed. Okay.